Hi, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Carla D'Imperio, and I'm the Director of Family Support with the Phelan McDermid Syndrome Foundation. Thank you so much for joining me for an hour today to talk about and explore how to talk about Phelan McDermid syndrome. So this was a really popular topic. We actually have 60 people registered for today's webinar. We are recording, so if you have to hop off early, I'm going to send a follow-up email to everyone who registered with the link to access the recording as well as my slides. So don't worry about feeling like you need to write anything down, and you're welcome to, come and go as you please. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. This is our first in our series of Pathway. It's called the Pathway Webinar Pathways Education Series. We're offering one webinar every month during 2025, and some of you who have been around a while might remember Pathways from a couple years ago. So we're kind of bringing back that concept of supporting our community in different pathways to learning and accessing and becoming better advocates, basically, for our loved ones with Phelan McDermid syndrome. So today's topic, again, how to talk about Phelan McDermid syndrome. I did pull your survey results from folks who filled that out, so I'm going to be building that in a little bit as well throughout the presentation. So thank you to those of you who were able to do that. Just a little Zoom housekeeping. You'll notice this is a webinar, so we can't see you on camera. We cannot hear you. So if you want to talk to one another, please use the chat feature. You'll notice that on your control bar, there's a little icon for chat. I'm not going to be in there monitoring that chat. So if you ask me a question in there, I'm not going to see it. So if you have a question, please use the Q&A feature, which is also on your same bars. There's a little question mark blurb thing, and you can use that to ask me questions. And then if I cannot answer them in the moment, I will definitely answer them to the best of my ability at the end of the time together. And whatever I can't get to, I will put in a follow-up email. But again, I'm not in the chat, so please put your questions for me into that Q&A. If you want to connect with people, you're welcome to, share your own contact information there. I cannot share anyone's contact information, so when you get a follow-up email from me, everyone will be BCC'd on that. Okay. The last thing is Poll Everywhere. So that's something, if you were at our conference this summer, you're already familiar with. We are going to be using Poll Everywhere for some interactive polling questions. So grab your phone because we're going to be taking a picture of the QR code so you can access that in a minute. If you have trouble with it, you know what, it's okay. It's really just to get kind of a general idea of who's on the call and how people answer the questions in general. But if you're not able to make it work, that's fine too. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Go ahead and pull up your phone and take a picture of this QR code. You can also use the link on the bottom to type that in, pollev.com/PMSF1. And we're using the same QR code, same link throughout. If you have an issue, you can put it in the Q&A. So I'm going to give you a second to do that. I just want to get us practicing with Poll Everywhere since we're going to be using it. All right, I'm going to take this down in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And we're going to go ahead into Poll Everywhere. So here's my polling questions. You're going to see this. You should see it on your phone as well. I've activated the poll. So please only complete what I ask you to complete in the moment. There's 14 polling questions. We're going to start with number 1. So go ahead now on your phone. This should be popping up and share what's the age of your loved one who has Phelan McDermid syndrome. I'm wondering if we're having an issue because it's not populating. Give me 1 second. Okay, I see that there's 9 people working on it, so I think we're good. It is activated. I'm going to present again. Share my screen again. All right, perfect. Sorry about that. I had it on the wrong setting. So hopefully you can see now our group of who's participating. It looks like most of us have kids that are 0 to 12 or 22 to 39, nobody with anyone over 40. So just getting a feeling of who's out there. Our second question, how long ago was your loved one diagnosed with Phelan McDermid syndrome? All right, we're working now. This is why I wanted to do some practice questions because it can be a little tricky. 1 to 5 years ago, we got a few responses there. Some people within the last year. More than 5 years, a couple there. So it looks like most of us are 1 to 5 years ago. My son Matthew was diagnosed in 2016, so I would fall into that more than 5 years ago category. All right, keep going. Which state do you live in? And this one, you're going to type it in, and if you see your state pop up, you can use a star to star it. That'll add more votes to that state. We've got some folks from other countries. We've got the UK, Canada, Tennessee. Who else is out there? Massachusetts. A lot of people in Canada. Very cool. And again, this is really just to get you guys used to using this polling. So I see California, thinking of all our families out there with those fires. I'm going to give it one more minute. All right. Oh, see more down here, some more Canada. Quite a lot of different people from different places. All right. What's your relationship to the person with Phelan McDermid syndrome? I'm curious if we have, I know my sister's on here, so we do have an extended family member. I'm curious who else we have out there besides parents. Looks like a lot of parents, a couple extended family members. I was wondering if anyone would be on that's a medical professional or a therapist or anything like that. We have one other. So mostly parents or guardians. Okay, great. All right, and so this is the last question for now. Which group do you struggle the most to explain your child's diagnosis? Strangers out in the community popped up right away. School team, strangers in the community is a big one. Extended family members. Okay, and there were some comments in the survey that I sent out yesterday about extended family members. So hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions. One of the key things here is there's no magic answer. So we're going to talk about some strategies and do some practicing of scenarios and how to talk about your child's diagnosis. But sometimes it's not going to be an easy answer, and I think getting comfortable with that idea is important as well. All right, let me go ahead now and switch back to my presentation. We're going to pause on the polling. So I'm glad you all kind of have a feeling for how to do that. We'll get back to it. Give me 1 second. All right. And again, if it's not working, the poll everywhere, it's okay. It's just helping me as a presenter as well get a feeling for who's out there. All right. So today, participants are going to gain confidence in talking about disabilities in general. We're not going to spend a lot of time on that, but there's a couple points I want to run through just generally about disabilities. Hone in on your own guiding beliefs about your child's disability. learn strategies for discussing a PMS, Phelan McDermid syndrome diagnosis, identify and prepare for challenging scenarios, which will help you then develop some concrete answers and talking points to use when the situations do come up. And we're really excited to be trying out our new QR code card and sharing that with you today. So I'll share that at the end of the presentation and answer any of your outstanding questions. All right. And I see that in the question, what's the presenter's username for Poll Everywhere? There should be a way to get by that. When we go back to it, let's see if we can figure that out. All right, so universal beliefs about people with disabilities. These are just some guiding principles for talking about disability in general and things to keep in mind when we talk about people with disabilities. And this is something as parents of children with Phelan McDermid syndrome or extended family members, you already probably operate with these in mind anyway. But folks we encounter out in the community might not. So I think it's just important to highlight them and remember that all of our interactions, all of the conversations we have are a chance to kind of communicate these types of beliefs and values to the world. So everyone has the right to be treated with dignity, kindness, and respect. Everyone should be supported in living their life to their maximum potential. Whatever that looks like, that's going to be different, obviously, for our kids and adults with Phelan McDermid syndrome. Everyone should have as much independence and autonomy as possible in their own life. So, within our children's limitations, they're still able to make some decisions. So it's supporting them to the most of their ability of being able to do that. And always assuming understanding and presuming competence. I think that's a really important one to remember and keep in mind in all kinds of different scenarios with our kids. In terms of our own specific guiding principles or beliefs, it's almost like a value system. Your own family's beliefs about your particular child or your extended family member might be a little bit different and nuanced. So for my family, these are our beliefs about my son, Matthew, who he's just about to turn 10 this spring. Matthew has a right to dignity. So that one we already talked about, but it's so important to my family that I feel that I wanted to mention it again. We always work to respect his dignity, whether that means keeping him as clean as possible, keeping him, being mindful of what we talk about around him, including him in family events to the greatest extent possible, all of those things. He is a unique and valuable person, just like his two siblings and just like anybody else in our family. His life is meaningful and his life can be full of joy and happiness. That's something I truly believe about my son. He's not deserving of pity. My family is not deserving of pity. His diagnosis does present my family with a unique set of challenges that affect every aspect of our lives. So while I don't want people to feel sorry for us, I do want them to understand that living with this diagnosis is difficult. And every conversation we have in the world is an opportunity to communicate some of these beliefs, whether it's a small interaction at the grocery store or a larger presentation like this, whatever the case may be, there's opportunity every day to communicate these types of values and beliefs. All right, so we're going to go back to our polling and real quick, I want you to try to, let me see. Answer this really quick, just, in a couple, like a bullet point, like I did. What's one of your family's guiding beliefs about your child or adult child or your loved one with Phelan McDermid syndrome? It could be one of the ones I already shared, or it could be something new. He may be different, but he's not less. He has equal value. I love that. His life is valuable. If you see one you like, you're welcome to star it. Use those stars. We love him for who he is, not for what he can do. She deserves to be happy and safe. That's great. I love these. I think that's such a good reminder too, with all of my kids, thinking about loving them for who they are, not what they can do, right? Not how they do in school or whether they're behaving, but loving them because they're your child. He deserves compassion. Let me give it another second. He has a unique, special personality, and I'd say that's very true with my son too. High praise and positivity go a long way with him and with us. It's her world too, and she is our life's best teacher. It's her world too. I love that. Absolutely. She deserves to be included in any and all family activities. He is strong, smart, and loved. These are great. Inclusive, not exclusive. So any interaction you have is the opportunity for you to communicate these things. When people see you out with your child, it's a chance for you to show these beliefs and values. And then, we're going to get to this as well. Sometimes you're not going to want to be the teacher or the advocate in every moment, and that's okay too. All right, put that aside. I hope it's not too clunky to use the polling, but it's working okay on my end. Just have to kind of get used to it. All right. So there's some tricky topics that might come up this is still that more general conversation about disability. Describing a child's skill level is one that can be kind of difficult. Person first versus identity first, and specific language and knowing your audience. So we'll go through these real quick. Describing a child's skill level, a lot of times in my work with families, I find families and myself too, we want to talk about our kids and kind of get a feeling for, well, my son Matthew can do this and that, but how does that compare to someone else's child with Phelan McDermid syndrome? And we kind of default sometimes to this high functioning and low functioning language, which I don't love, because I do think that this concept of low functioning is not really aligned with keeping and upholding someone's dignity. So trying to sort of steer away from that. And I've come up with some other potential ways of phrasing and talking about, a person's skill level and how involved the diagnosis is, basically. So you can say it's highly involved, complex, medically fragile. Describing their independence level is really good. So my son is fully independent with walking, but he needs a lot of assistance with grooming and dressing. He needs total assistance with toileting. So using that language and describing the skill rather than the person's functional level is kind of, I think, a more respectful way of approaching it. Living with minimal assistance, or do they require actually total assistance? So those are just some alternatives to using that language of high and low functioning, which I find myself using as well when I'm talking to families, and always kind of saying, oh, I wish there was a better way to say this. So here's some options. I sent a little video out about person first versus identity first, and there's no right answer with this, but it is something to be mindful of. Again, that our language matters, and there's sort of two different ways to approach talking about a person's diagnosis or disability. Person first, so you would be saying something like a person with autism, or he has epilepsy, where the first part of the sentence is actually talking about the person, the subject, so a person with, or he has. And the concept and mindset behind this is that a person is a person first and the disability is secondary. The person does not form their identity around the disability. And this was a really popular mindset probably 10 to 15 years ago, that there was a big push for person first language. And actually, more recently, there's been an emerging movement to use identity first language. So an autistic person, or he's epileptic. So you're using that describer, that adjective in first rather than using it after. So in this case, and I'm realizing that it would be more he's an epileptic person would be the proper way to write it. In this case, the idea behind it is one cannot separate the disability from the person. So your disability is a part of who you are, part of your identity, just like a person's gender might be, or their religion, or something else that basic to who they are. And that's okay. So either way, whatever you choose, it's an example of how language can matter, and to sort of know what your opinion is on it, and then use that to kind of inform how you talk about your child. The little video I sent, I think, is helpful in illustrating it as well. So again, there's no right answer to this. It's really up to your family. Ideally, it's really up to the person with Phelan McDermid syndrome with a disability. And in the case of my son, he can't make those decisions for himself at this time. He wouldn't know what to say about person first versus identity first. We could ask him. So in that case, it really is the family making the decision for him. So I'm going to see what you all think. What does your family prefer? Do you prefer person first or identity first? So we're on poll everywhere. You're going to keep going through your polling, and we're at question 8. I see there's a lot of I'm not sure, and there's no identity first here, which is interesting. And really, if you haven't thought about this before, it is something you might have to think about and kind of decide your opinion on. And that is okay. And nobody's saying identity first, so that's really interesting to me. Okay. All right, so I mentioned this a couple times, language does matter. So that was one example of language mattering with person first versus identity first. But and any choice of words, any way we talk about our kids is going to be a reflection of them, particularly if your child is not able to speak. So choices between words like caregiver versus caretaker, even where a caretaker is what you think about someone taking care of like a yard or a lawn service, right? A caregiver is someone who gives care to a person. There's just those little choices can really matter. So sometimes euphemisms, which are like using a more positive word to describe something, made up and outdated words may have unintended consequences. And, that's okay. That doesn't necessarily always mean, obviously there's some words we really do want to avoid using, but I think it's important just to be aware that the words do have weight, right? So examples are like special needs. Some folks don't love that because it is kind of euphemistic. Some people really, that's what they use to describe their child, special needs. These are just some examples of words that may have unintended consequences, and just knowing that the language choice matters, as does the audience. We have a question in the chat. So to be fair, identity first is difficult to say for people with PMS. It's not easy. Absolutely. And I think that, so we've as a foundation kind of moved away from using PMS as an abbreviation. We really try to spell it out and say Phelan McDermid syndrome as much as we can, because the PMS has such an association with premenstrual syndrome, and we've kind of moved away from that in terms of maintaining dignity. And similarly with PMSer, that's something that a lot of members of our community really like to use to talk about their child, PMSer. And it's something we as a foundation have sort of moved away from because of that association with PMS. So interesting point there in the questions. Okay, so I'm going to skip this next poll. Know your audience is another key point. That's that, if you have someone coming to your house and they're interviewing you to determine your child's budget, for example, for the waiver, this is something that just happened here last week. That's really not the time to try to brag about your child's greatest accomplishments. That's really the time to describe their disability and the stark reality of how difficult it is, right? If you're talking to someone like a friend or a family member about how proud you are of your child, then you're probably going to choose different language because that's a very different audience. So knowing your audience and the nuances that can happen with that is important. All right. I'm going to just quickly, I want to make sure you all can hear the sound on this. Let me see. Can you tell me? Let me make sure. All right. I think we're good. So we're going to shift gears a little bit and start to talk about Phelan McDermid syndrome specifically. This is a little video of some siblings, including two of my kids, talking about Phelan McDermid syndrome. So we're going to watch this real quick and then get into more about that. Can you tell me what is Phelan McDermid syndrome?
For that syndrome. Phelan McDermid syndrome is like, it's when like a person is missing a gene inside of them.
Can you tell me about Phelan McDermid syndrome?
It's a syndrome where people have different, like, they've lost one of their chromosomes, and that means like they have different disorders, like they can't walk or talk, but they have a hard time like it's just, and they're missing a gene and it doesn't make their body act good.
What do you mean about losing chromosomes? Can you tell me more about that? You understand what that means? What? Give me a little more information.
Like two chromosomes, they lost it, and I don't know what that means.
What's something that's hard about having TT as your brother?
It can be embarrassing.
Like in public?
It's hard for the family, and it's hard for any siblings or anyone that just knows them.
So that's just a quick little snippet from my two kids, and then Amanda Bergen's son. She's on our staff as well. So I think what it shows is a couple of things. First of all, some of the insight of children, you know, they're missing a gene inside of them. It makes their body not act right. Those are really smart ways of describing Phelan McDermid syndrome, and very simple, right? And then there's my 12-year-old son really struggling to be able to articulate it, even though he's around me and hears me working with families. We talk about it. He's been to the conference, but it's still really hard to explain. So those are kind of the two things I wanted you all to sort of take away from that video. And then I want to share with you, I'm afraid this is going to start playing really quickly, from a presentation that I did for my daughter's kindergarten class. So I was asked to go in and talk about Phelan McDermid syndrome with a group of 5-year-olds. And this was made into a longer presentation. So it's a little bit long, but I wanted to share with you the language that I used to discuss it with, again, this is 5- and 6-year-old children. I want to tell you about Matthew. Matthew is a very sweet 9-year-old boy who loves Daniel Tiger, swimming, and his dog Ollie. Matthew needs lots of help with eating, sleeping, and learning. He does not talk. Sometimes Matthew screams and screeches because he cannot use words to talk. Sometimes Matthew gets sick and needs to go to the hospital. Lots of things are hard for Matthew because he has something called Phelan McDermid syndrome. Matthew has Phelan McDermid syndrome because there was a change in very tiny parts of his body before he was even born. Your body is made up of lots of tiny parts. These parts are so small that you need special tools to see them. Each tiny part has a special code that tells your body how to work and how to grow. These codes decide things like what color your eyes are, how tall you are, or whether you might need glasses. If there is any little change in these tiny parts, it can cause differences in how someone's body grows and works. Phelan McDermid syndrome happens because of a change in one of these very tiny parts. Phelan McDermid syndrome is a rare condition that affects how a person grows, learns, and behaves. People with Phelan McDermid syndrome need lots of help with things that are usually easy for other people. People with Phelan McDermid syndrome are also like you. They like to play, they love their family, and they go to school. They laugh at funny things and they cry when they get hurt. You might notice that someone with Phelan McDermid syndrome makes loud noises if they're excited or upset. This is just their way of telling you how they feel. You cannot get Phelan McDermid syndrome from someone else. You can't get it at all. It's something that happens before you're even born. Okay, so obviously it's a little bit long, and we're going to get from there sort of to your kind of elevator speech about quickly answering about Phelan McDermid syndrome. But I think talking about differences in changes in the little parts and the code with kids, that's a really great way to approach it, because a lot of our kids in school age are they do a lot of coding, they do a lot of STEM activities, so they can relate to that from a very young age. So that is one longer example, but I did want to just make sure you had the chance to hear that. These are some of the quick examples of how families describe Phelan McDermid syndrome. Some of these I got from your survey answers, and some of them are from other parents that I've asked previously for some of the sessions I do with new families. So it's like autism, but more medical. That's one I've heard from a few people. It's like epilepsy, but more behavioral. Phelan McDermid syndrome is a rare genetic disorder where there's a problem with chromosome 22. I love that. Super simple. Problem on chromosome 22. It's a rare genetic disorder that affects a lot of areas of my child's life and means he has complex special needs. It's a rare genetic condition which causes a global developmental delay. Here's a few more. I usually just say that there's a section of chromosome 22 that's missing. That's very simple as well. Genetic variants on the 22nd chromosome, which causes challenges across a variety of developmental markers. A genetic syndrome, not usually inherited, causes an intellectual disability. A diagnosis my son received that impacts his ability to, I think it meant to say, to communicate and learn like a neurotypical child, and will require him to need support for the rest of his life. And a rare genetic disorder which can impact someone's functioning in many areas, including intellectual and developmental disability. So we hear all of these things, and I think it's still hard to say in the moment a quick answer. You know, these are a lot of sciencey language and a lot of big words, and it's kind of illustrating how many different ways we can describe Phelan McDermid syndrome, but also how it is challenging to break it down into something really simple. This is directly from our website. So this is language that was developed, I think about a year or two ago, as a more simple way of describing it. So Phelan McDermid syndrome, with the pronunciation Phelan McDermid syndrome, is a rare genetic disorder involving chromosome 22 that can affect many critical functions in a person's body, from learning and communicating to eating and sleeping. I think the piece that's sort of missing here is that there's a lot of behavioral pieces as well, and some of those neuropsychiatric challenges that some of our older members of our population can have. This one's from our clinical consensus guidelines. Phelan McDermid syndrome is a genetic condition caused by SHANK3 haploinsufficiency and characterized by a wide range of neurodevelopmental and systemic manifestations. Probably not grocery store stranger friendly, right? A lot of big words there. And same, this one's from NORD. It's very similar. I'm going to just keep going. So these all are long definitions that you can find on different websites about Phelan McDermid syndrome. So what Phelan McDermid syndrome is all of these different things. You can say it's a chromosomal abnormality, a genetic mutation, a genetic anomaly, a congenital syndrome born with a difference, a rare disease. There's lots of different ways to describe it. And then what I would suggest doing, and one way to make that sort of quick elevator speech, if you have a minute or less with someone, you can take one of these terms. So let's say a complex medical condition, okay, or a rare condition, and then choose two easily understood symptoms that your child has. In my case, I would probably choose for my son autism and epilepsy, because those are huge parts of his diagnosis that we deal with every day. They are words people are pretty familiar with, that people could relate to pretty easily. So I would say Phelan McDermid syndrome is a rare condition that includes autism and epilepsy, period. That is a really quick, easy way to kind of put together an answer in your head that you can throw out in the moment at the grocery store or with a random stranger, or whatever the case may be. Maybe your child's dealing with seizures and neuropsychiatric issues, whatever the case may be. Choose two major symptoms and combine them with one of these sort of describers, and there you go. You have one way of answering that question of what is Phelan McDermid syndrome. I personally would avoid symptoms to do with incontinence, to talk about my son if he was there in public. I just think that that doesn't really align with maintaining his dignity. But that's, again, a lot of this is personal preference and opinion. So you can simplify or elaborate as needed, but that's one way you can quickly formulate an answer to what is Phelan McDermid syndrome. Okay, so these are all going to start playing. They all start playing at the same time. These are 3 quick examples.
Phelan McDermid syndrome.
Hang on.
You've probably heard of Down syndrome.
It's
before.
like a nightmare of all of them talking at once. Okay. 3 quick examples of answers you could give about what is Phelan McDermid syndrome. 2 of them are 10 seconds or less, and 1 is 30 seconds. So I'm going to play them for you. And again, I'm going to send out my presentation, so you'll have access to these if you're interested in listening to them again. And, you know, you can use them, change them, whatever the case may be.
Phelan McDermid syndrome is a rare genetic condition that means Matthew has seizures and autism and needs help with pretty much everything. Phelan McDermid syndrome is a neurodevelopmental disorder that causes my son Matthew to have medical issues, challenging behaviors, and difficulty learning.
So that one pulled in the behaviors and the learning, which I think is important. You know, you can tailor it however you want. All right, this one's a little bit longer.
You've probably heard of Down syndrome before and met someone who has Down syndrome. Well, Phelan McDermid syndrome is also a genetic condition like Down syndrome, but it's even more rare, so a lot of people don't know about it. People with Phelan McDermid syndrome can have all kinds of symptoms like low muscle tone, seizures, autism, and a whole lot of medical and behavioral challenges as well. Most people with Phelan McDermid syndrome need a lot of support and assistance throughout their entire lives.
Okay. And, you know, when you bring it up and compare with things like autism and Down syndrome, the danger, the drawback is then people are going to relate it to that and think, oh, okay, he's autistic or he has autism. That's it. He's just like this person that I know who has autism, or, oh, he must be like the person that I know that has Down syndrome. So that's the only thing I would say that gives me pause when I do use those types of phrases, but sometimes it's the only way to really help people understand what you're talking about is to pull it in and compare it with something else. All right, so this is what Phelan McDermid syndrome is not, and I think this is great when for kids especially, because sometimes kids are afraid they can catch something or is it contagious. So it's not just autism. I know that when someone has an autism diagnosis, that's a huge thing in and of itself, but our kids are unique because they have, many of them, most of them do have an autism diagnosis and all these other things going on, right? And in the same way, it's not just epilepsy. Epilepsy is a huge diagnosis, and our kids also have a lot of other symptoms and issues going on. It's not something most people are familiar with. It's not something that gets better or goes away, at least not yet. You know, of course, we're working on cures and treatments, but right now it's not something that gets better or goes away. It's not an infection or an injury. It's not something someone gets. It's not something you can catch from someone else. And it's not caused by anything someone did. It's not someone's fault. I think those are all important things to keep in mind. All right. So let's see, poll. How are we doing here? I'm going to activate my poll, go back through. It's going to take me a second. All right. So how would you describe your Phelan McDermid syndrome in 1 or 2 sentences in your own words? So when I collected responses in my survey, a lot of people, I think, maybe pulled from our website or use some other things to help. Try and do it in your own words. How would you, if you had to do the elevator speech, if you had to use some of the strategies I just showed, how would you describe Phelan McDermid syndrome? I'm going to give you 30 seconds. These are anonymous, so, don't worry. It is question 10 for the question in the chat or in the Q&A. We're on question 10. It's a genetic disorder that it can affect every part of their lives. I love that. I love the affecting every part of their lives because I think that helps communicate that it's serious, right? This is a big deal. A genetic disorder, people like genetic disorder, I think, which is caused by a chromosome deletion in my nephew. It causes autism, muscle tone weakness, and communication problems. That's definitely very comprehensive. That's a good one. Profound intellectual disability. It's a rare disease that causes a profound intellectual disability. All right. And if you submit these and I don't get them out there, I will see them after and I can add them in the notes when I send my follow-up as well. So don't worry if it doesn't get captured right now. All right. So we're going to move on. I'm going to skip through a couple things here. And we're going to get into some scenarios out in the community. So we've kind of started describing Phelan McDermid syndrome. Hopefully you have some ideas now of how you can talk about Phelan McDermid syndrome briefly and answer, what is Phelan McDermid syndrome in a quick and succinct way. Now I want to share a story that happened recently with my son and have you all sort of think about some of those tricky scenarios and how we can respond. So recently I had Matthew at the park. I take him to the park a lot on Sundays when he's home because he has a really hard time being home and not being in his usual school routine. He would rather be out doing things. So I take him to the park and just let him, he plays very calmly. He really enjoys being there. Maybe an hour will pass and he'll happily be playing and climbing the equipment. He mostly leaves other kids alone. When he does interact with other children, he's not aggressive. So it's usually a pretty peaceful way for him to play. And this time recently, a family came along with lots of little children. All of them were younger than Matthew, and one of the little girls wanted to go down the slide, and he was behind her. So she was sitting at the top. She's probably 2 years old, so she's much smaller than him. And he pushed her right down, and she was not ready to go down. So the mom yelled at him, no, no, we don't touch others, we don't hit others, we keep our hands to ourselves. And she really didn't assume in that moment anything positive about my son. She thought he was trying to hurt her daughter. And to be fair, the child was very small, but the little girl was fine. She wasn't crying. She wasn't hurt. And when you get on the slide, you go down the slide. So he was kind of just communicating, let's get going here. He loves being on the slide. And in that moment, I had some choices to make, right? I had to sort of stop. I was feeling really upset and mad because he didn't deserve to get yelled at. He really didn't do anything wrong. And I just felt the way she was looking at him. She was not seeing the sweet, kind child that he actually can be. And yes, he can be a stinker sometimes, but he generally is very sweet. And in that moment, he was being perfectly fine. So I actually decided to leave. I didn't want to take that one on that day. I let him play for a couple more minutes and then we wrapped it up and went home. I did not feel like it was worth confronting the family and talking about it. The parents were drinking blatantly open containers of beer at the kids' park. I did not feel like I was going to get very far with trying to advocate or trying to educate. So we went home that day. I was able to calm myself down and not let it ruin my day. But, maybe a couple of years ago, it would have been one of those moments that really could have ruined my day. So that was a moment where I sort of stopped and made that choice to disengage and leave. So I think sometimes that really is a very viable and very good option when you're dealing with difficult scenarios out in public. These are just some points and tips, advice from other parents about staring and about these kinds of situations. So staring can come from curiosity, even though it is rude and insensitive. People stare when they see something different. They often don't know how to react, so they're curious. So try not to take it personally if someone's staring. Try to give people the benefit of the doubt. and you're in control of how any of this affects you. I think that's a really important point. So that day at the park, I was in control of my reaction, and I decided I'm not going to go there today. I'm just going to go home. I'm done. And that's okay. And that was a good decision to make that day, and one that supported me being, able to go on about my day and have a decent day. So you can try to spread awareness with your interactions, but it's also okay if you don't have the time, energy, or patience to do it all the time. I think that's a really, really important point to keep in mind. I also want to go back. It says ignore, explain, apologize, or walk away, depending on the context. So in that moment when I paused, those are kind of all the decisions I could have made, right? And I chose to walk away. I think giving people grace and remembering, maybe that mom that got mad at him, maybe someone had hurt her child on the playground before, maybe she was having a bad day. Everyone has a bad day once in a while, and just because they have an unkind moment doesn't mean they're a bad person. So every person, including me and you, we're all capable of kindness and being unkind, right? So usually it will make you feel better to be nice. And I've found for me, rather than get my hackles up and be ready to dig in, often it's better to just disengage and walk away. Something good too is to introduce your child to people. So maybe if I had introduced Matthew to the kids on the playground before that happened, maybe it wouldn't have happened. Maybe I could have prevented it. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm gonna move through that one. You don't always have to educate and advocate. There was a video, I think I sent you all the video about the woman with no arms, and how sometimes she just wants to get a gallon of milk, right? So I think that's a really important takeaway, is it's okay if you don't want to be that advocate all the time. It's okay to walk away. So these situations can catch us off guard. How can we be ready for them, and how can we diminish the emotional toll that the situations can take on us? So I'm going to go back in here, and we're going to hear from you all on that question. Let me find it. I think we're on question. Okay. I'm not going to do how to respond when someone stares, because I think we've covered that. But what emotions can come up when you're surprised with an uncomfortable situation? So when you get taken off guard, what feelings can you have in the moment? Sadness, frustration, anger, grief. Yeah. I mean, I think that it can really take you off guard and pull you right back to that grief that you maybe felt early on in a child's diagnosis. Anger is a big one. So, it's a word cloud. So the anger means a lot of people are saying that. Embarrassment, disbelief. Yeah. How could someone say that? How could someone act like that? You can get very defensive, sad. And I know if I let it really bother me, I could be sad. It could really ruin my day. It could make me not want to go back to that park for a long time. Right. And I think I've been able to sort of learn to overcome that, and separate that from how I live my life after something like that happens, because these things are going to happen, right? Frustration is a big one. Anxiety. Yeah, you might have anxiety about going back to that place, maybe anxiety about going to the grocery store. I know my son hates going to the grocery store. He screams when he sees we're going there. And so there is a lot of anxiety with all of us in my family around going with Matthew to the grocery store. Yeah, okay, those are great. Thank you for sharing all of those. Sadness is a big one. And I think that's what's so hard, is it can really take you off guard if you're just going about your day, having a perfectly good day, and then something out of your control grabs you off guard and puts you into this place of sadness or grief or frustration. Triggered, it says. It's good to sort of be ready for that and know, okay, let me stop in that moment and make a decision about how I'm going to react from here. And today, maybe I'm just going to go home, right? All right. Let's see what the next one was. All right. So this one is, what is the situation, a scenario that you have experienced that you would like to share? So while I reactivate, I'm going to have to go all the way back. I'm going to read a couple that came in with the survey. Okay. So this is question 13. What's a scenario you've experienced? And again, if you want to just make it real quick to summarize, that's totally fine. Some of the ones that came up in the survey that I sent out were, let me find one that was good. We were asked to leave a hotel swimming pool because our 6-year-old was making happy noises. Believe it or not, that actually is something that happened with my family as well. My sister's on here today and she was there, and we were escorted out of a swimming pool because of Matthew. And it was really, really embarrassing. And in that situation, in the moment, we did not engage and escalate it. There was no point. The people that we were dealing with were not going to hear us. However, afterwards, I did do a lot of follow-up with the HOA and the organization, and there was accountability for the person who removed us from the pool. So I think that's an important point to remember, is that you don't always have to engage in the moment. You can take pictures, you can document things, you can write things down, and then you can follow up with, if you were at a store, if you were wherever you were, you can follow up afterwards. Another one that I thought was really interesting was, today the receptionist at the vet walked away with my child to show her how something worked, and my hackles were up rather than be relieved by the intervention because I was pretty sure my child wouldn't respond in the way she expected. But I held back on stopping it because I didn't want to assume my child couldn't understand something, because it was possible she'd understand. So this is almost the opposite scenario, right? Where the person at the vet's office is including your child and wants to show them something, and the parent's like, oh gosh, how's this going to go? And I commend that parent for letting it, let's try it, let's see what happens, right? I thought that was a really interesting scenario to share. People staring in grocery stores, that's one that came a few times. Meltdowns in public. At first, it was difficult if your child was having a meltdown in public, but now it's the public's problem if they're annoyed by the outburst. So this parent has gone through a transformation of their own mindset, right? From going from that, it's not my problem, it's the public's problem. I love that. I think that's a great way of looking at it. Okay, let's look at the ones that are up on the screen. I was told she'll never learn to walk if you just carry her everywhere. A lady walks right up to us at the fast food place while eating and asks, what's wrong with her? I said, nothing, what's wrong with you? I mean, that's a way to respond. We got kicked out of a hotel because my daughter was jumping and it was too loud. And that's another example where, you know, the people you're dealing with in that moment at the hotel may not be the ones that are worth engaging with. It may be worth it afterwards to then bring it up with the management or with the corporate, depending on the hotel, right? When going out for a meal and people stare, it makes me mad, but I choose to ignore it and enjoy my family time. Well, good for you to get through that point of being able to, you know, not let it bother you and enjoy the time. It's hard though. It's really hard to get there. Okay. Let me see my last one. Let's keep going. So these are some quick replies, and I got these from some different special needs parenting blogs. And you know, personally, I don't like to give the sassy replies, the snarky replies, because then I'm engaging with them and then it's going to escalate. And I personally am not a confrontational person, and I don't want to have a back and forth in public with someone. I'll probably end up crying if that happens. So having questions like, oh, you're looking at him, so do you know him? I thought you might know him. Oh, would you like to be introduced to my son? Can I help you with something? Have we met before? Those are all really great ways to address it if someone's looking or doing something that makes you uncomfortable. Do you have a question you want to ask? Do you have some questions for my son? And then this one I liked a lot too. Did you mean for that to sound blank? So you could say, oh, did you mean for that to sound rude? So when the person says, what's wrong with her? Did you mean for that to sound rude? Did you mean for that to sound ignorant? You could fill in the blank however you'd like. Or you smile and wave, right? There's a lot of different ways to handle it. And sometimes not letting it bother you and just smiling and saying hello, that's a good way too. All right, so this is my last polling question. Are there any one-liners that you keep in your back pocket? So do you have any examples like that of one line? Oh goodness. One line little responses. And if you have more of those sassy ones, that's fine to share too. That's not my personal way of handling it, but I think that works for some people. So what one-liners do you keep in your back pocket? Maybe there's not a lot of one-liners, and that's okay. I think the ones I just threw out there were pretty good. When she makes the loud happy noise, oh, she loves it here. I love that. That's great. Usually I have to apologize for something my child has done, like try to steal food. So when I say sorry, he has an intellectual disability and doesn't understand. Hi, this is Matthew. This is so-and-so. Yep. So introduce them. And I think the one with that saying he doesn't understand is I would go back and forth about that personally because I know for my son, he does stuff like that on purpose because he does understand and he thinks it's funny. Like he would love to grab someone's food in a restaurant because he thinks it's funny. And he definitely understands. So that's what's tricky too, is I think there's a mischief piece to Phelan McDermid syndrome. Sometimes our kids like to see what the reaction is that they're going to get. I typically smile and wave if someone is staring. Yeah. Hi, can I help you? Direct eye contact. Yep. So I think there's not a magic answer. None of this is comfortable. There is going to be discomfort, but I think it's how do I get myself away from getting really mad, frustrated, sad, and get to a point where it's a mild discomfort and move on with my day, right? Okay. Let me go back. We're almost done here. Somehow made it through all these slides. Okay, so I hope that you got something helpful from what we've talked about so far. This is the quick resource card that we're introducing. So literally something in your back pocket. So the point would be to print it out as cards like this and keep them in your wallet or in your purse or whatever the case may be, so that when you have these types of situations, you could hand the card to someone. So maybe that day at the park, I could have left one of the cards on the picnic table before I left. Is it going to make every difference to every person or, educate everyone completely? No, but it will help. And it's a way to spread awareness and advocacy without having to, think about your explanation every time. So for those of you participating today, we are going to mail you 10 of these cards, and we want you to go and try using them in the community over the next few months. And then we'll send you a survey in a few months and see how you like the cards. And if you have suggestions for changes before we roll them out and release them more broadly. So you get to be like a pilot program for these new cards. And I will be sending a survey with my follow-up email that'll have a place for you to enter your address. And I will be mailing these to you probably sometime next week. So hopefully I want you to try them. I want you to hand them out. Let me know what you think of them and if there's any suggestions you have for changes. So when you scan the different codes on the cards, it's going to take you to, well, this front code, I'll show you where that takes you. These back codes on the back of the card, like this, they take you to different pages on our website. But the front code, the big code, takes you to this is a link tree, and we can add different documents and different things to that. So that's where if someone scans that QR code, it will take them to this site, and then they can learn all about Phelan McDermid syndrome. There's also going to be a place for you to print out more yourself if you want to. Okay. All right, so that bit basically sums up our session about Phelan McDermid syndrome. I have the rest of the first half of the year session titles for pathways up here. So next month we will be hearing from Corey Sutton on de-escalation strategies for crisis situations. So that is on February 18th. It's also a Tuesday at noon. I hope you'll join. He's excellent. He's a law enforcement liaison and he's a PMS dad to adult twins with Phelan McDermid syndrome. And then if you want to keep talking, if you want to talk to other parents, we do have 2 of our caregiver support groups coming up in just a few days. So you can go, I'm going to send this link in my follow-up email. You can go on our website and register. The caregivers of individuals birth to age 18 is this Sunday at 3. And then next week for ages 18 and up is next Thursday at 8 p.m. And those are for parents, primary caregivers, and guardians. So if you're an extended family member on here, that would not be probably the best group for you to register. But if you want to talk to me more about any of the topics brought up today, then you're welcome to reach out to me. So my email address is carla@pmsf.org. Always happy to chat with our families and hear, what you need support with and how we can better help you. So if you have questions, I don't see any more questions in the Q&A, but you're welcome to type them there. We're at 101. So I'm going to thank you and thank you for joining today, and I hope you have a great day.